In this episode, I have a discussion with Prashanthi Amarnath about embracing paradox in the Tao Te Ching. Welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm theoretical physicist Dr. Shannon Ray, and I've had an interesting few months. Recently, I've had a sudden influx of people contacting me wanting to be on the podcast, which is just, it feels really good. I mean, I've been doing this podcast for 5 years, and I don't think I've ever been contacted by anybody wanting to be on the show. I think it's probably due to me uploading on YouTube more often recently, getting a broader reach. But either way, I'm happy about it. So today's episode is a recording I did with Prashanthi Amarnath. She is a information technology engineer, and she's also the author of the book Embracing Paradox, Dive into a Mystical Adventure with the Tao Te Ching Through 81 Enchanting Micro Lessons. So yes, this episode will be another Tao Te Ching episode, but this one's all about embracing paradox. So it's funny because when I got contacted by her PR agent, she did a very good job, because given Prashanthi's background in information technology and her spiritual foundation being the Tao and paradox, it's just like perfect for this show. I mean, for anyone who's been listening to this show, they know that, okay, this is a perfect guest for this show. And, I went into the conversation hoping for the best, and I think the conversation went really well. I think it took a little while, I'd say probably about 15 minutes or so for us to, get comfortable in the conversation. But I would say that the latter half of the conversation, after like the first 15, 20 minutes, really gets going really well. And I think that it was enjoyable to listen to Prashanthi's perspective and her approach to her spirituality and how she comprehends and understands paradox. And throughout the conversation, I noticed the way she spoke about how she came to the Tao and what it felt like writing the book really reminded me of how I came to know God through the Bible and when I write my poems. And it's just this effortless need to communicate what's being spoken to you. And so she's very good at explaining her approach to the Tao, which isn't meant to be a technical, scholarly approach, but it's more designed to be a personal one, based off her personal experiences. And it's designed for people to relate to these things without over explaining them. It's not meant to be explanatory. It's meant to be something that's felt, embodied, and embraced, and practical. Something, things you can tell yourself that are practical, but at the foundation are the mysteries of the Tao and paradox. So I think with that, we can get into the episode. I don't think I have anything else to say. If you are interested in being on the show, you can always email me at bottomturtleinquiries@gmail.com if you're interested, or if you know someone who might be interested, let them know. I will be having more guests on in this way, so I think for now it's probably a good format to just kind of like just have as many people on as possible. I'll still upload my random rants or as Ted Rambles would put, my rambles up. I have a few recorded that I might upload, but yeah, I'm happy with the podcast and the progress it's made. I already have another person lined up I'll be doing a recording with them on Thursday, so that's fun. It's awesome. So if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, I appreciate you. I appreciate all your support and all of your interest, and I hope you will continue enjoying the podcast. Reach out if there's a topic you want me to discuss. Reach out if you want to be on the show. That's always possible. It's easy to do. So yeah, with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the recording. Peace. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm theoretical physicist Dr. Shannon Ray, and I have my guest here, Prashanthi Amarnath. Did I say that correctly?
You absolutely did.
Perfect. And she is here because she is a person with a background in information engineering, information technology engineering, right? That's what you have your degree in?
Yep.
And you are a person who grew up in a multi-cultural, multi-belief system household, which has impacted how you live your life today. And what you've gravitated toward in your life now is Taoism. And you've written a book called Embracing Paradox, which is designed to teach people about Taoism and how to use it in their practical day to day life. So the question is, why did you gravitate to Taoism, and how does it help you when bracing paradox? Because I'm dealing with the spontaneous aspects of life, because I am a typically anxious person. So you can actually speak directly to me, like calm me down, help me to understand how to use Taoism to help me embrace uncertainty.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shannon. It truly is an honor to be here. I love the space your podcast holds for real human stories and true inner transformations. My name is Prashanthi, and I am the author of The Embracing Paradox, a book that was inspired by the timeless wisdom of Tao Te Ching. I am not a traditional author, but I actually don't come from a scholarly background in Taoism as well. My journey began as a personal quest, a longing to just connect with that all pervasive consciousness that just moves through everything. And what really drew me to Tao is its formlessness, its refusal to be defined. The
Hmm.
moment that you try to grasp it, it just slips through the fingers of language. And
Yep, yep, yep.
somehow that very mystery made it feel home.
Yes.
Like, I also fell in love with the Tao because it is so simple. It just teaches that everything, including us, is sacred and there are no coincidences. So that we are always, always exactly where we are meant to be. And
Hmm.
when you see life through that lens, like the trust just becomes natural because the same power that moves the galaxies and seasons is the same power that's holding our lives together. Like, how could you not trust that source?
Yeah.
Like, if they're able to like do everything outside of this tiny human body, like why don't we trust them with this tiny human body? Like,
Hmm.
it's so natural to not trust Tao and not trust the nature, the consciousness, or name you want to call it. And here's a paradox, right, that deeply shaped me. Like, everyone's living inside their own reality where they're the main character of their story. Like, we don't need to downplay ourselves or outperform anyone or shape shift to fit into someone else's narrative. All we are asked to do here is be authentic,
Yeah.
just be yourself.
Yeah.
And that was one of the biggest paradoxes that I had faced, and I'm still facing. I'm still working, like you said at the beginning, Shannon. We all are work in progress. Just it just feels like there are layers and layers of peeling that's happening as we speak, and it is very important to go through this process of peeling the layers.
Hmm.
And I feel silly to have that expectation that I will reach my destination because that's not in my hands. It's not in my control
Yeah.
because when that enlightenment, that knowledge would come, is the work of that consciousness. When they want to reveal themselves, they will do it at the right time.
Yeah. So, so a lot of the difficulty is just controlling, wanting to control things. Yeah, I think that the control comes with the lack of predictability. So and this is something that I think when it comes to the idea of embracing paradoxes, I think it's associated with embracing uncertainty and to not fear what comes when you go into an unknown space. So like for me, like I said, I'm usually a person who whenever I have like an event like, interviewing you or some event in the future, like a test or something like that, I put that at the center of my reality and everything like focuses around it. And so I get anxious because I want the outcome to be good. I want this conversation to come out great. I want to pass the test. I want, it's like you said, when interacting with other people, then you want to control how people perceive you. You want to control what the future will be. And so there's something about paradox that's associated with uncertainty or entropy. And if you want to control, you can go inside. You can avoid. So you can avoid new experiences because then you know everything's predictable. And with the background in information theory, we know that the idea of gaining information during an interaction is described by the amount of surprise. So for you to gain information, you must be surprised. But if you can predict the future and you already know what's going to happen, then you're not going to be surprised at all. And so to be able to actually like to actually gain information, to be alive, to learn, to grow, you have to put yourself in uncertain situations, which is a process of letting go of control, it seems.
Right. That's very interesting that you brought this topic up because I've been debating about this myself. Like, do I really need to do that? Do I really need to put myself in that situation? Or do I just let it go, like just like how Dav says, the right thing will come to you at the right time. We
Mm-hmm.
don't need to put ourselves in this tight situation where we go out of, I mean, it's important. And that's, that's another interesting topic because that's what the self-help does. Self-help is all about that. There's a big difference between what self-help does that's so popular today. Everyone loves getting a self-help book or even a podcast on self, but that's not what we need for this. At least that's what I think that we don't need in this. I don't need that kind of help at this point because one of the most common misunderstandings that about Taoism is the idea that it's passive. It just asks you to like sit back, detach, and let just life happen to you. But in truth, Taoism teaches something very different. It teaches responsive participation. So it's not about withdrawing from life, it's about moving in harmony with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it invites us to act, but to act from alignment rather than agitation, right?
Yeah.
From clarity rather than force.
Yeah. So I was talking with another person who is another recording that I had. I uploaded it. I actually uploaded an episode on Taoism. I think it's called Taoism and the Failure of Materialism. And when talking to Dane, he was thinking that he thought that Buddhism and Taoism are probably the same thing, just said in different ways. And so when you're talking about like this idea of not being passive, but it's more like an embrace. It's more like when you're trying to meditate, for example, there is a paradox. Like meditation to me is the process of embracing paradox because you set out to achieve something. I want to meditate. I want to reach higher states of meditation and relaxation and attunement with myself. If you've ever meditated, you know what it's like when you're in a good meditative state. But if you set out to say I want to do this and you try to force it, then it doesn't happen. And so you have to say something like I want to reach a state of meditation, but to want it, I have to not want it. Because if I want it, I force it, and forcing it means I don't get to where I want. So to want to get there, you have to not want to get there, which is to say something like the idea of wanting to get there is the idea of wanting to control how things end up. Whereas you're saying it's about alignment. It's about not trying to go one way or the other, but to stay within the paradox of control and not control. And so I would go into that because I want you to kind of, if you can, summarize Taoism. Like, is this a belief system that has a God at the center? How do they understand and define consciousness? Like, what are the core tenets of Taoism if you had to like break it down to someone who's completely unfamiliar with it?
Right. Okay. So that's great. It's a really great question, Shannon, because I wanted to talk because Tao is very mistaken. So to really talk about Tao, I want to mention the opening line that Lao Tzu talks. This whole experience has been so sacred to even like talk about Tao. I feel extremely honored, so I want to offer my loving pranams to Tao. And so the opening line says, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." And it's probably the most famous line in the
Yeah.
entire Tao Te Ching. And the beauty of that is that it tells you in the very first breath that whatever you think Tao is, it isn't that.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
Tao. For
Yeah.
me, in the context of like the modern life, this line is a reminder that the deepest truths aren't meant to be captured, labeled, or turned into
Yes.
concepts. And
Yes.
we live
Yes.
in a world that wants to label everything, our identities, our emotions, our beliefs, our productivity, our purpose. We're constantly defining and refining ourselves as if language can contain the fullness of who we are.
Yes, it can.
Right? No.
Another person I've been talking to is this guy named Dario, who's a graduate student in Italy, and he's been writing his thesis on this Italian poet named Montel
Oh,
Eugenio, I think, and he's
okay.
been studying and analyzing it through analyzing his work through Lacanian psychoanalysis. So
Wow.
so I talked to him for about 6 months. This is something that
Okay.
I often
Okay.
do. Is I meet someone who has like some sort of larger worldview, like some large
Yeah.
understanding of reality that they've gained through years of experience and study and whatever. And I like to interact with them to kind of stitch together our world so I can comprehend it. And within
Mm.
Lacan, you have this idea of the symbolic order and the real. These are what two registers in Lacan. And so when you say that the Tao cannot be contained within words or language, this is the idea of Lacan that the real cannot be totalized within symbolic order. So the real is something like that which is outside of language, structure, information, coherence, and so within that tradition of Lacan, this is not, it's the exact same statement that if you're trying to capture the real within language, then you're going to fail. It's not possible. And so in this idea, when you say the Tao, that which is the eternal Tao cannot be spoken. So anything that is spoken is not the eternal Tao. This gives an idea, an understanding of where to frame the Tao in a spiritual sense. Because for me, this is something like the separation between heaven and earth, where the earth is associated with things that are instantiated, things that are structured, things that are in configurations, and then heaven is that which is outside of it. So within a lot of traditions, this starting off foundation of separating the eternal from the temporal, and that the eternal cannot be totalized within the temporal seems to be like ubiquitous.
Yeah, absolutely. Lao Tzu says, be careful with definitions. The moment you define something, you limit it.
Yes.
Like in modern terms, the Tao is that part of life that can't be turned into like a tweet, a slogan, a philosophy, or self help framework. It's that quiet intelligence behind things. It's the
Yeah.
unseen order behind
Yeah.
all the chaos. And it's the presence you feel in moments when mind finally stops narrating. And this is what when you mentioned about the meditation, it's exactly that. When your mind stops chatting and then it goes into that non-narrative phase, and that's where you start flowing with the Tao. And
Hmm.
that's what it means to be in Tao, and that's very similar to the meditative state. But the paradox here is that meditation doesn't have to be what we think in our conventional sense, like we sit down and have a space and we just close our eyes, and that's not that is meditation. That's a form of meditation, but you can meditate while you're working, like
Yeah.
while we're doing our jobs that we do in the day-to-day life, because that is the most important distinction that we have to make. Because meditation, when we say meditation, first thing that goes in mind is Buddha, and you're sitting in a lotus position with your hands, and there's like, no, that's not it. You could be at work, because this is what we need for this modern day life. Because
Yeah.
when we say not everyone has the luxury to have that space and time to do the meditation and tame the mind. How, I mean, it's kind of a silly task to even like say, mind, stop thinking, stop chatting, because it is going to chat. It's
Yeah.
we're not going to we can get there, but it's very difficult to get that in this modern world. And that's why this modern world needs something different.
Yeah.
And that's where flowing with the state and being in alignment with Tao, not in the meditative is great. It's one of the ways to get there, but there are many other ways. Well, parenting, we could be in alignment with Tao. While working in our day jobs, we could be in alignment with Tao, and still get that those benefits of meditation, that the calming of the mind and aligning with Tao. You could still be aligned with Tao doing whatever you do on your everyday life. And that's why people can relate, people can understand, because not everyone's going to have this kind of a background. We want people to embrace Tao from all walks of life. And Tao Te Ching was initially written for the politicians, the leaders in those days. And when I started living those, I was like, I could practice it. I don't have to be a politician, a government official to practice Taoism or to follow the Tao Te Ching. I don't have to. I can be an ordinary person that I am, doing everyday life, just performing my duties, and I could still be in alignment with Tao.
Okay. With that being said, can you tell me about
Mhm.
your entry into Tao? Like, it sounds as though you had a profound moment or profound
Mhm.
experience that brought you into this relationship. So, like, how did you come across it? And then, can you explain like your relationship to it? Like, and because it's different from meditation for you. So, could you just break down your relationship with it?
Of course. So I've always been fascinated with spirituality as long as I can remember. Like, well, most kids my age like used to watch TV, run around, and I was a child who just loved going with my grandfather and listening to spiritual discourses
Hmm.
from my guru. And I was very lucky to be blessed with a guru in this lifetime. She's Satya Sai Baba. He is and many other teachers as well that he admired. And my grandfather was in awe of them, and I was in awe of, of him.
Oh, wait,
And those,
so you had a guru and what tradition? Like, can you explain on that? Like, you had a spiritual guru, or your grandfather did, and so yeah, can you explain that?
yeah, of course. So I was very lucky to have a guru, Sri Satya Sai Baba, and my grandparents found, or that guru accepted my grandfather as his disciple back in the 1930s, 1940s, and that guru got like my parents loved him, and then in that lineage, I also got into the folds of my guru. Or my guru wanted me to be in his folds, I should say, because it's a beautiful experience when you have a guru in this life. You know God, because in the tradition that I grew up with, guru and God are one. There's
So
no
what
separation.
tradition is that?
So it doesn't matter, and that's a beauty of
Okay,
my guru.
okay,
He embraced multi faith, and that's when I said I grew up in a multi
I
faith
see.
environment. He embraced all religions. He had in Hinduism and Buddhism and Christianity, people, Muslims, everybody came to him and he embraced everybody. And it was powerful at that time in India. It was in 1930s, 1940s. In India was under repression. Right?
Yeah.
India went through so much in its in its term, and it's gone through a lot. And during those times, we did have Hinduism was prevalent everywhere. And at that time, he was like, "No, all paths are one. There's only one God. Love all, serve all," was his motto, and he embraced everybody. And so I had played the role of Jesus Christ. I was very blessed in one of the plays, and I've done multiple. I embraced all religions because that's what my gurus told me. And when I was a kid, that totally made sense. My guru, my God, said, "Embrace all religion. All religions one. Everyone's one. There's no difference between Christians and Muslims, and because all gods are basically the same." So that really helped me shape my childhood, and of course being with my grandfather, who was very spiritual. I grew up with my grandfather. Of course my parents were very spiritual too, so that really helped me get into spirituality at a very very young age in life. But that being said, how did not come to my life that early. Very, very recently came across Tao, and I was at an absolute crossroads in my life, spiritually, physically, mentally. I was exhausted. I was working 20 hours a day, and it was just one of those heavy days. And I went to bed, and then I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was like, Tao Te Ching. I started searching for Tao Te Ching, and I was like, I
You just randomly went to bed and just woke up like, I need to start
just
searching for Tao.
exactly, and that's why it's I can't explain it logically. It felt like something inside me was being turned towards a direction that I had consciously never explored. I just
Yeah.
sat there in that quiet of the night and reading about Tao Te Ching, and it just felt like opening a door that had always been part of my home, and I just hadn't noticed it until then. And then something beautiful happened, Shannon. That Sunday, I went to a prayer hall.
Hmm.
We offer a multi faith prayer to my guru. And I've been chanting this prayer since I was little. And for the first time in my life, the one line hit me with the force that I can only describe as recognition. The line was Rahim Tao too, meaning you are Rahim, the deity worshipped by Muslims, and then you are Tao. And that line, I've been singing that song for like, God knows, since I could sing. And I did not notice that line. And the very next day, I noticed that line. And it was like something in me just clicked. I realized in that moment that Tao had been woven into my spiritual life
Mm.
long before I consciously even knew it. And I
Yeah.
felt a very deep, very calm knowing that this is part of my path. I am
Yeah.
just meant to understand this. And from that point, the Tao Te Ching wasn't a book I was studying. It became a companion, a mirror, a teacher. I wasn't drawn to its philosophy. I was drawn to its feeling, its
Yeah.
softness, its simplicity, its ability to express truth without like forcing it. And that's ultimately what shaped my decision to actually write Embracing Paradox. I didn't decide to actually write a book. The book decided to emerge through me. And as
Yeah.
I sat with the verses, they just started revealing like layers inside of my own life.
I see. I
And
see.
that's what I had written on the book. It's like it was like peeling off each layers. I peeled 81 layers of my life, and each verse just became a conversation with my heart, my fears, my contradiction, my longing for peace. The writing just didn't feel like an effort. It
Yeah.
was like that state that we just talked about. It was very meditative for me. It just felt like a response to something just calling me from within. And to be honest, I wrote this book not as a scholar, but as a very ordinary human being who had stumbled upon something extraordinary. And I wrote it the way that the Tao revealed itself to me, like gently, honestly, and through lived experience.
Yes.
So yeah, what
Okay.
drew
So.
me to Tao was not curiosity or study, but something much deeper, or a sense of recognition, like remembering a language my soul already knew, like it
Mhm.
was predestined. Um, I
Yeah. So yeah, this is really interesting because it reminds me when I started going through my spiritual journey.
mhm,
My spiritual journey was, so I was raised Christian when I was younger, and but I wasn't really taught scripture in detail. I would go to church, but I didn't really listen as a kid. I would say most of my exposure spiritually came from just the environment of being around Christianity and like what was expected of me morally and ethically and how to behave and treat others. So I wouldn't say that I didn't have like it had a big impact on me, but I didn't understand it scripturally. So when I went to college, I, eventually, like very basic, I went to college and became an atheist. But it wasn't because I had some sort of hatred for Christianity. My experience growing up Christian was actually really positive. It was more like I started needing to question my, like, how do I know this is real? Like, how do I, like, once you realize something, like people used to believe in Greek mythology and treat it as fact, and now we treat it as mythology, then how do I know that my religious beliefs aren't bullcrap? And so at some point in time, I needed to go and expand my horizons and like basically allow myself to question and explore. So I was an atheist through most of undergrad, and through grad school. But through grad school, I started recognizing something called spiritual philosophies, which are something like, I know that if I take one action, then it'll make me feel one way.
mhm,
If I take another action, it'll make me feel another way. So I have to come up with a set of ways of being in the world such that I avoid like making myself miserable. So it's something as basic as that. But then when I got to after I finished my PhD, I started working as a quantum information theorist. So I started studying information, the concept of information theory every single day. And I was grappling with a complicated relationship with someone very close to me. And I remember one night I thought to myself, I'm going to meet God tonight. And so I was able to reconcile this relationship with this person and, well, not reconcile it, but see it in a new way. And I
mhm,
remembered what I saw was I would not be who I am without this person. So the person I'm talking about at the time, as a scientist, I had elevated logic, reason, and science to like my God. Like I exalted them. Like I actually told myself that I worshipped when I was still an atheist, I told myself I worshipped science, reason, logic, and these things. And so because of that, whenever I was interacting with this person, they were believing in things that were really illogical and incoherent.
mhm.
And so I obsessively thought, like, why do they believe that? Why do they think that? Thinking all these negative thoughts and energy toward them. And then this one day I was watching a TV show where there was a character who was supposed to be like an educated character, but he was struggling through something. There was like a conspiracy theorist like character, and the conspiracy theorist character who's not logical and believes crazier things, he was helping the one that was supposed to be logical and reasonable. It was Atlanta. It was a Donald Glover show. Atlanta was what I was watching, and I remember in that moment seeing this person, because I had elevated logic and reason so highly, when I saw someone being illogical, it brought harsh judgment and negative energy toward them. But in that moment, I was able to see this more illogical person helping the logical person. And so I realized that through my interactions throughout my life with this person, that my trajectory and who I become would not be the same without this person. And it's not just this person because of their existence, it's because of the way they think. Because they don't think like me, it brought me to a certain point of being. And in that moment, I was able to emotionally and conceptually comprehend us as one, that there is no separation. And I started crying. And I cried very deeply. I was crying throughout the night because this negative energy and emotion like just went away. And then I had a sense of oneness with this person. And that was the moment I started believing in God again. So that was like the moment I started believing in God again. And then from there, I now that I believed in God, I was more open to the idea, and I actually came across a friend of mine who is a converted Jew, but he's also a former Zen Buddhist, and he has a contemplative practice. And I started having lunch with him, and he started explaining to me Buddhism, and so I started studying Buddhism at the same time. There was a Christian friend of mine, so I started studying Christianity at the same time. So my spiritual journey actually started off with Buddhism and Christianity intertwining, and like them reinforcing each other in a way that it felt as though one was explaining the other back and forth. And I say all this because you mentioned your relationship with the Tao and how you it felt like it's like a softness that spoke to you, and that's what it was like reading the Bible. It's like you read the Bible and you start getting this feeling like, where did this thing come from? Like it's so profound. Like what is this where could it have come from? It doesn't feel like it's just a basic book. But the most important thing is the feeling of a relationship. Like it's this idea of a relationship with God, like like a conversation going back and forth, to where your heart starts to open, and it's this subjective relationship with the text. Like it's this subjective relationship with the Word of God, and your subjective relationship with the Tao that makes you believe, and that relationship doesn't come from structure. It doesn't come from like I can empirically prove to you that God spoke to me from like that's not how it works. It's
Yeah.
it's a subjective thing that's outside of the objective order, and that's the thing that I really think is important about paradox in this sense is that it's something like you have to go beyond the material, beyond the empirical, and you have to go into this space of uncertainty and kind of embrace truths there that cannot be like verified in a way that people would like in a scientific sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, that is so powerful. You just said it's very, very powerful because paradox is it's like exploring opposites. Like how do you relate like joy and grief and success and failure? And when you were saying how do you like even we're anxious at sometimes and we're not so anxious at sometimes, and there's time to be both. And that's the comforting, softening part about Tao Te Ching and Tao is that completely changed my life and the way I relate to difficult emotions. It just made me be so much gentler with myself because I no longer see sadness or fear as signals that something is wrong. They
Mm,
are part of a full spectrum of being human, just as how night balances the day, how emotions balance the rest of our inner world. And when grief arrives now, I don't resist it like the way I used to. And I just remind myself that grief and love are twins. You simply
yeah.
can't have one without the other. And the depth of the grief is kind of evident, right? At the depth of the love. And that understanding
Yes.
just
Yes. Yes.
softens
Yes. Yes.
everything.
Yes.
Opposites aren't enemies. They're
Yes.
companions. And when I stopped treating difficult emotions as problems to fix, they just stopped overwhelming me. Like they just became invitations, like invitations to just feel more deeply within, to just understand myself a little more. So the paradox hasn't just changed how I think about emotions, but it just changes how I started holding them together. And that was just a beautiful part of the unfolding part for me with writing this book and knowing about Tao Te Ching is just surrendering to the beauty of
Yeah.
all.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I think that's the important thing is the surrendering. It's
Yep.
the humbling and the surrendering. And I think what you're humbling and you're surrendering yourself to is contradiction, incoherence. Because paradox
Yep.
itself is true contradiction, which sounds like total nonsense. This is why whenever people say something like you have the excluded middle, it has to be A or not A. It can't be both at the same time. And that's the funny thing. A and not A being true at the same time is a contradiction. And in logic, that usually indicates that argument, the structure of a larger argument is not valid. It's like, oh, look, if I start off
Mm-hmm.
with these premises and I follow the logical consequences, I get to a contradiction, then something went wrong. But the
Yeah.
idea, but the idea of seeing a contradiction and then thinking to yourself, ah, no, that is the truth, is the idea of humbling yourself to incoherence. That doesn't make any sense. Up is down. What are you trying to say right now? And and that's why it cannot be within language, because up and down being basically language is words are basically vectors in a space of concepts. And so when I'm trying to communicate something to you, I use a string of words to point your mind over here instead of over there. If I say, hand me $5, I'm not saying like let's go break dance, right? Like it points you over here, not over there. And so and the idea of embracing a paradox is like saying go left and right at the same time. And you're just like, blah, my mind is gonna break. I can't do that. That's nonsense. But understanding that the core of reality is nonsense, understanding that at the core of it is something like contradictory, incoherent nonsense is the thing that we're supposed to embrace.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the most powerful things, like you said, the paradox teaches is how to make clear decisions when logic simply isn't
Yes.
enough.
Yes. Yes.
Logic is incredibly useful, like, but it tends to narrow our field of vision. It pushes us towards either choosing A or B, one direction, one identity, one answer. But paradox, like, just does the opposite. It widens the lens.
Yes.
Like, instead of forcing a choice between two competing truths, paradox just invites us to hold them both for the moment. Like in that space, when we stop rushing to resolve the tension, and that's when interesting things happen. Like a third path often reveals itself, a path that includes the wisdom of both sides, rather than like just rejecting either one. So when we allow that complexity instead of resisting it, we begin to see the possibilities, right, that were hidden before, that were kind of kept away from our side, our mind. And that's when that arises. And the clarity doesn't just coming from choosing sides, it comes from holding both sides enough for that deeper intuition that God, the Tao, the consciousness, the universe, guru, whoever, right? For them to actually speak, give them a chance to guide you. And when you're holding both the truths, and that's when that guidance shows up. And that's that state of going with the flow, or flow state,
Yes.
or
Yes. Yes.
or
Yes.
meditation is just all about. So it just comes from holding the sides and let that deeper intuition kind of to speak. And this is where Taoism like just becomes incredibly practical, right? When you soften the urge to control, when you stop tightening around the right answer, your inner knowing has that room to raise. And
Yes.
then decision becomes less about forcing and more about aligning with what feels true. And paradox isn't confusion, it's a doorway to deeper clarity. when
Yes. Yes.
when you get two opposing contradictory statements, it's an invitation to hold them both together and let the Tao speak to you through the intuition. And it teaches us that mind may choose quickly, but real wisdom actually emerges when we give ourselves permission to sit in that space in between. We
Yes.
have to
Yes.
sit and rest in that space. And that's and this is so important, right? Transitions, especially now we're going through. I don't follow, Shannon, what's going on in the news. I turn off everything. I'm off the grid.
Yeah. It's probably best for your mental health. I try not to focus on it too much either. I got a wife and kids and stuff. So it's hard to hold all that on your shoulders. Yeah, emotionally it's too much.
No, it's a lot, and that's why I think it's very important, because I feel like we're living in that times of transition.
Yes,
Don't you feel
absolutely.
that? Like these are but some of the most tender chapters of our life. You look back, this is going to be the best times of our lives. There are moments when like the old no longer fits. I don't think we fit in like as a collective, as a whole world, everyone's living on the planet. Like I could feel that there are moments when like the old just no longer fits, and but the new hasn't really arrived either. So
No.
this in between can feel,
Right,
it's just
right.
incredibly destabilizing, like almost like the ground is shifting under your feet. And this is exactly where paradox becomes a lifeline, because paradox gives you the permission to be in between. It
Mhm.
allows you to say, I'm grieving what was, and I'm curious about what's next. Like I'm still grieving, I'm holding that, and I'm also holding what's up in the future, and I'm scared, but I'm just brave enough to keep going, and I feel lost, but something in me is it's quietly awakening. I could almost feel it. So it helps you live with both these contradictions. But most of us are taught we need to be that one thing. You say you're confident or you're uncertain, you're ready or not ready, strong or overwhelmed. We want that answer. But
Hmm.
transitions don't work like that.
No, they don't.
Like they're made for contradictions. They're made at contradictions. They require contradictions, and we allow these opposite truths to coexist. The transition just stops feeling like free falling and begins to
Yes.
feel like expanding. Like you're expanding yourself. You're not collapsing. You're stretching into this new version of yourself. And this is where paradox stabilizes us, because it removes that pressure to have the clarity, like before the clarity naturally
Mm.
arrives. And
Yes, yes, yes.
that's a sacred space that we need to sit in, and just soak in all of that, the paradoxes. And it kind of removes the pressure, right, to choose one identity. And when you're still becoming, it just lets you breathe inside the uncertainty rather than just resisting it.
Yes.
And something beautiful just happens when you do that. The fear just softens, the path widens, and you begin to trust that in between is not a mistake. It's actually a passage. So
Yes.
paradox doesn't resolve or solve transition. It just supports you through it. It holds both your trembling and your courage. And in that holding, you find your center again, while even everything around you is changing and is in a constant state of flex. So I really think paradox is one of the most beautiful thing. You're religious, you're not religious, you believe, but just accepting everything is just the way it is meant to be. Like I said in the beginning, like we all are living in our own identity. We are the heroes. We are the superheroes in our own story. Everyone's living their own reality. So why bend ourselves? Just be yourself. And there's another very sacred quote from Tao Te Ching is Tao doesn't differentiate between a sinner and between someone who does good. It doesn't differentiate. It's like nature. It's like rain. Rain pours for everyone. It doesn't matter you're a murderer, or it doesn't matter you're someone who's doing acts of generosity all the time. It just doesn't matter.
Mm.
Tao just showers its blessings to everyone equally. The sun shines, the oxygen's available for everything, everyone. And that's where the beauty of Tao is. It doesn't see who you are. It just sees how authentic you are at that given moment.
Interesting. You know, it's funny that the statement you said about the shining equally on people regardless of like their virtues. Um, what's it? Yeah, I think that's part of one of the tensions that you're being asked to hold. It's something like good and bad coinciding with each other. It's something like, and this is actually at the core of Christianity too. That the core of like Christian forgiveness is this idea of replacing judgment with grace. And so when you see what would be considered sinful inside of others, the whole point is that you're supposed to uh, give. You're basically it's an idea of openness. It's like the way to purify sin isn't to judge it and shame it. The way to purify sin is to enter into its space and open yourself up to it. So you have to expose yourself to the sin of another person. And when you do that, they're going to harm you. They're going to hurt you. And so this is something like the Christ-like position of dying for other people's sins. You put yourself in that space and then you take on the harm from that sin. They don't, there's nothing that they did to deserve it other than you seeing them as part of reality. They are a being in reality like you are, and as such they reflect the nature of reality. They reflect the nature of God. They reflect the nature of the Tao. And so in that sense, the nature of reality needs good and bad. This is the whole idea of like a binary, and this is the whole idea of the paradox. The paradox is reconciling binaries, up and down, good and bad. And the reason why you need bad is because you need a reference. So to be able to perceive something, you need a compare and contrast, a reference frame to say it's this, it's not that. And so if you all you had was good all the time, and there was no bad as a reference, you wouldn't even be aware of good. And so there is no good without bad. And so this tension you're trying to hold is something like at the core of questioning things, especially Christianity, is why does God allow evil? Why are bad things exist in the world? Why do evil people get away with things? Why does this occur? And what that can invoke is a state of judgment. Who would create such a reality? The essence of reality, whether you're calling it the Tao or God, what type of evil being would allow suffering to exist in this way? And so that so that judgment not only allows you to condemn the sinner, but allows you to condemn existence entirely. And so to embrace existence, to embrace existence as a whole, you have to have like an infinite depth of love for it, which means that even the sin of reality is open to your heart. Just like you would open your heart to an actual sinner, you open your heart to say the suffering or the sin of reality. And because that nature is also within you. And so, to whatever degree you have that nature inside of you, and you are a person who does sin, or you're a person who has these negative things you don't like about yourself, the more you judge other people, the harder it is to embrace those things in yourself. And so, this goes into the idea of Jung's idea of a shadow. So, when you suppress and repress these aspects of yourself that you can't hold because you think they're not worthy of existence, they're not worthy of being held, then you avoid them, which then puts yourself in the dark and puts yourself further away from actually being able to be sincere and honest in the world. And so there has to be something at the core of embracing reality and truly existing, a capacity to hold sin, hold suffering, hold negativity without judgment, convert that judgment into grace, accept it and love it. Because the more you do it to the things that are outside of you, the people outside of you, the more you can do it for yourself, the more you can like embrace. And so this tension of trying to reconcile good and bad, or the problem of suffering, is at the core of Buddhism, Christianity, I think most religions. And it's the and so uh, you have to be careful when you say something like it doesn't matter if someone does good, or it doesn't matter if someone does bad. It's more like someone doing bad does not negate their validity as a being, something like that. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very interesting you bring this topic up because recently I've been sitting with this paradox. I call this paradox the paradox of isolation. So on the surface, your isolation looks like separation. It looks like withdrawing, like limiting contact or pulling it back from the world. But in my experience, like isolation, what I prefer to call is this intentional simplification can
mm,
actually deepen our sense of connection. But here's a paradox, right? By stepping back from people, we begin to see the oneness in each person more clearly. But when we limit our interactions, it's not about shutting people out, right? It's actually about not pulling their drama, their projections, their expectations into our field of energy, because it's creating that space that we're not constantly observing the noise of others. In that space, we just allow them to simply be without making their experience part of ours, and then having this, bringing this element of judgment that you talked about, is that we just let them be. We let them in their space because they're living their own reality. We don't know what they went through in their life to be what they are, to make that decision. So really, we have to allow them to have that space. It's about
yeah,
just letting them be, just simply be, let them, because they're in their path and they'll learn when it's time for them to learn. And who am I to force my timeline into theirs and my learning? Because I've been through a completely different path of life, and so did you, and so did everyone around us. So there's a quiet wisdom in not needing actually a large circle of acquaintances, and not out of avoidance, right? But it's something out of clarity, because the truth is it's challenging. It's really challenging challenge to see that Tao, the consciousness in everyone, the
yeah,
sacredness, the essence in everyone. We get tired, we get triggered, we are human, we have limitations. And when our exposure is wide, or too wide or inconsistent, like we start to feel like imposters, like pretending to live from oneness while our nervous system is overwhelmed.
yeah, yeah,
And then when Tao revealed something beautiful to me, is that if you want to see Tao in all beings, like start with the ones closest to you. Like when you truly begin seeing the same Tao in your partner, the same Tao in your siblings, the Tao in your parents and in your child, the close circle that you can't avoid getting away from, focus on them first. Try to get that oneness. between the ones that we see every day. You realize that it's the same essence just expressing itself in different forms, and the same consciousness just wearing different faces. And from that place, like, reverence just becomes very natural, because they're the people that you live with, and you have to love your spouse, you have to love your
Yeah.
children, your parents. So maybe
Right.
start somewhere small, and then slowly, right, as your capacity expands, let that circle just widen to your close friends, to your community, and eventually outward to humanity itself. You'll get there, it'll grow exponentially, but you have to start somewhere. And all of this happens not because you force it. It's the recognition of oneness just comes organically. So here's a paradox, right, that I've been holding. Isolation isn't like a retreat from the world. It's your preparation to love the world more fully.
Hmm.
And by stepping back, we strengthen our ability to see the Tao in others. And by just simplifying, right, we deepen our capacity for connection. And by being alone, we begin to understand that unity, that we all are
Hmm.
one. And that's the beauty of Taoism. What separation looks like often becomes that doorway into oneness. And I practice isolation like a lot, and I've always been that way. I'm a very private person. I don't talk. I don't talk a lot except for this forum. I usually don't, and I don't have big friend circle. And I try to see the Tao in the people that I live with my spouse and with my child, and at my work especially. I practice a lot of Taoism at my work, because I have to work with my peers for almost 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and I have
Wow.
to kind of get that oneness, and take from there, and then slowly start seeing the whole world, because I'm not ready yet to be that.
Hmm.
So I'm just having a strategy. But look at me, right? Crazy. Like, why am I strategizing things when Nav knows when it's time to reveal itself,
Hmm.
really? So it's just about me just letting all that settle and just sit with it.
It kind of reminds me of your practice of isolation. Reminds me of the Buddhist sense of expanding consciousness, where if you have a bunch of thought, it's almost like the fewer things. So what they have the concept like single pointed samadhi, I think it's called, where you focus on one thing, and they have like a set of things that you're allowed to focus on, that like a flickering flame or something like that, and or your breath, for example. And the idea is that when your mind is trying to capture too many things, it actually contracts your awareness, or your conscious awareness, because you're taking it and you're spreading it among too many things. But then the more you focus on one thing, the more it expands. And so it sounds like your practice of isolation is something like, you said something about the noise of others, like you characterize it noise of others. And so if you're stuck in a space where you're constantly trying to process this noise, you don't have time to kind of go inside yourself and start expanding your conscious awareness so that you can see the oneness in others. And so as you said, the contradiction is isolation actually creates for openness so that you can embrace other people. And it reminds me of this idea of, I think it was Ajahn Brahm, the Buddhist monk, that said something like, the idea of meditating when you have time is the idea that you're preparing yourself now, because it'd be like trying to prepare yourself for a war the day before the war. You go out into the world and you're in this chaotic mess, and you're trying to practice meditation and calmness, and it's like, no, you need to find a time to cultivate that, so that when you go out into the world, that you're like prepared. And so is that how you would characterize your practice of isolation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very well said. You actually paraphrased this very, very better. I just love, I was loving when you were speaking about this. It is so true. We need to have that space. We need to have that moment of silence, because we're constantly under distraction. There's something or other going on. This noise. There's noise everywhere, right? There's this content. There's so much content out there in the internet and the Instagram, and the moment that we get a quiet moment, we try to look at our phones.
Yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
happens.
Trust me.
What's going on?
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah. Actually, sometimes I wish that we didn't have those phones. I remember when I was
My
younger, prior to
gosh.
having them, and it was so much easier to kind of like just embrace the moment. And now there's this thing that's always,
Mhm.
but then also there's the conflict of the fact that I create this content on the internet, and I want people to interact with it. So it's like I'm just contributing to the problem.
Yeah, because that's we're living a paradox, Shannon. That's exactly what the paradox, and we have to hold them both and be okay with it. I know the world's crazy. It's got all this media, but I'm also adding to it. It's fine. I'm okay with it. I have to just sit with it.
So
That's a crazy thing.
I want to ask you something. So within your book, Embracing Paradox, it's supposed to be like a
Hmm.
practical guide for applying the Tao in your life, and like how paradox is foundational to that. And so one of the things that I've experienced when I was, especially right after I got out of grad school, I was essentially doing my dream job, but I was so fearful of failing that I was stressing myself out. And so I came to a realization. I remember one day I was laying in bed and I came to the realization that to be free so that I could do my job, I had to embrace the paradox of to care is to not care. So I started telling myself to care is to not care. Because the more I care, the more I focus on this
Yeah.
one thing wanting to come out the way I want, the more I want to control the outcomes. The more stress that gives me, the worse I perform because I'm wasting all of my emotional energy and focus on this out on the outcome. Whereas the more I don't care, the more I'm free, the more I actually do what I want to do. And so that would be for me something like a practical thing that I can tell myself when I'm trying to get through the world in a practical sense. So what would you say are your favorite go-to Tao practice, idea, mantra? Which one's your favorite? I mean, you can say several favorites. You can list like your top five or whatever.
Okay.
Like what are some of the things
Awesome.
that you would really say like your book says, buy my book because this is what you'll get out of it.
Okay, awesome. So I recently came with this little ritual. I would definitely love to share with the audience, with your audience, Shannon, so they could practice it for sure. So it actually takes less than a minute, and it helps train the mind to like hold the opposites, like we talked about, without collapsing into overwhelm. And here's how it works. So whenever you feel pulled, pressured, or uncertain, just take a pause and ask yourself, what are the two truths that are both real in this moment? For example, I'm nervous and I'm also capable. Like, I want clarity and I'm allowed to not know yet. I feel stretched and I'm still supported. What this does is soften the instinct to choose one narrative over the other. It shifts you out of that rigid either or mindset and into that spacious both and perspective. That's the whole paradox that we're naturally living in. And the beauty of this ritual is that it doesn't require meditation cushions, journals, or a perfect morning routine. Like, you can practice it while washing dishes, waiting at the red light, or preparing for a difficult conversation with someone at work. And over time, the nervous system like eventually learns something very important, that opposing truths aren't threats, they're invitations. They're invitations to hold complexity with a little more grace, and to hold ourselves with a lot more compassion. And that to me is the essence of a paradox friendly mind. And that is what the readers could get while reading the book, because Tao Te Ching is one of the most ancient texts. It was written 2,500 years ago, Shannon. It is so wise. So much of wisdom in Tao Te Ching, and Lao Tzu. There's like this mystical figure that no one knows anything about.
Doesn't Lao Tzu translate into like old man or something like that?
He is so mystical, like people just don't even know like his real name.
Yeah.
He's amazing. Tao Te Ching is lives at the intersection of language, mystery, timeless wisdom, and just balancing like faithfulness to, oh my gosh, the original Chinese characters are crazy. Every single character, so the whole 81 verses of Tao Te Ching was written within 5,000 characters. Imagine, I can't even write a freaking essay in 5,000 characters, and I have to like put him. So every Chinese character is so intense and dense, and it just carries layers of meaning. like a physical image, a metaphor, a moral insight, and a cosmological truth, all of that at once. And if I have to translate it word by word, like you lose the poetry. Like if you
Yeah.
over explain it, you lose
Yes.
the
Yes.
silence.
Yes.
So I chose to stay true to what the Tao itself represents, like simplicity, spaciousness, and lived truth. So my job was not to replicate the original Chinese, it was to translate the feeling, the essence that arose out of me as I looked at these verses. And that wisdom really touched my inner world. And I didn't approach this book from like an academic or like a Taoist proper translation perspective.
Yeah.
I just chose to create like interpretive reflections, like micro lessons that just honors the original themes while making them relevant to someone navigating modern life, Western life, family life, and a work life. Because when Lao Tzu wrote this book, he wrote this and he left. He fled. He couldn't live in that state anymore because there was so much of immorality going on. And we have to translate these wisdoms somehow and relate it to our modern life. And I wanted the text to feel approachable to someone who may have never read a spiritual book before. And I wanted them to open a page and read a few lines and just feel something soften inside, not because they understood the Chinese grammar, but because they recognize the truth in their own body.
Yes.
And I think that's how the Tao moves. It isn't limited by language, it isn't limited by culture, it just speaks through resonance. And my role was simple: to keep that resonance intact, to honor the wisdom while letting it breathe through my voice. And yeah, it was an intensive research process that I went through. Writing the Embracing Paradox is a little different from what people might expect, right? I didn't approach Tao Te Ching, like I said, like a
Like a
scholar. I was just
scholar,
trying
yeah.
to
Which is good,
just
I think. Honestly, I think that's a advantage because as a scientist, one of the things that I've noticed that really puts me off about being in that space is the over focus on logic and structure. Now that sounds almost heretical, like to say something like that. But I would say that within science and physics and within physics, there is an over obsession with structure and computation. Like,
yes.
and it forces you to kind of, if it's not in a textbook, then don't think outside the box. Like, I think that the scientific profession right now is replete or like saturated with people who think very mechanistically. And so what you're offering is not a logical breakdown of the Tao. Like, I explained this way, and then this follows from this, and this is why that. It's that softer, and this is why I say it's a softer, more feminine offering. So in other words, one of my complaints about, I would say, the scientific endeavor is that it's too masculine. It doesn't have a softer feminine structure associated, or a structure associated with it. And to give an example of what I mean, like one of my research papers that I wrote recently, where it's called A Differential Geometric Approach to Quantum Ignorance Consistent with Entropic Properties of Statistical Mechanics. I know it's a lot of words. But within the paper, I discovered a basically like a quantum Boltzmann's entropy associated with like entanglement and this quantum purifications and all these things. And so when I'm writing the research paper, you're forced to speak like a mechanic or a robot. Where I would want to, if I was up to me, I'd start the paper going, okay, so I would want to explain my motivations as to what made me come up with this idea. Like one day I was I was in a meeting with a colleague, and I said to him that I think Gage is all about significant figures, and he told me to stop philosophizing and to do a computation. And so from that, I was thinking about the idea of precision and symmetry. And like I would want to write the paper in this way. I was feeling this at this point. This made me think this for this reason. I went down this path of thought, and now because of that, this is where I came up, and here's what I done. You can't do that. That's just not allowed. Like that paper will get destroyed by the referees. It's not allowed. And so there is like there is something corrosive about over focusing on structure, logic, the masculine. Everything has to be in this. So I think what you're offering is good, that it's not coming from a scholarly perspective, but from a lived perspective.
Yeah, but also like how Dow says, both are important, right, Shannon? We need that and we need this. We need to sit with both of them. We
Hmm.
can't say one is right or one is not. So I just realized that when I said I didn't write it from a scholarly perspective, it doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
anything really. It's just It's just is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's kind of weird, right? How we arrived at these conclusions. It's just so, it's so natural. I think these are the moments, Shannon, that Tao reveals itself to us,
Hmm.
and that universe, the Christ, the consciousness. They reveal ourselves through these moments, and I'm very grateful to have this moment with you,
Yeah, this is an
Shannon.
awesome conversation.
It's loving it.
Yeah, I was gonna say something I forgot. But there's a lot of directions to go. One of the things that you said earlier was about the deep layers, like how the Tao has these deep layers, and it's succinct, right? So it's not very long. It's what he said, 81 verses,
Right.
5,000 characters,
Yeah.
and so these layers of meaning. Like what this reminds me of is something like watching a movie. Like imagine watching a movie and you watch it from beginning to end. You never seen it before, and then after watching the movie, you get some information such that when you go rewatch the movie again, you see it in a whole different light. Just like Fight Club. Have you seen Fight Club with Brad Pitt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, spoiler alert, I can't. That movie's probably 20 years old now. Though at the end of the movie, Tyler Durden, what's it? The Tyler Durden is what's that guy's name? The actor.
I don't remember, but I remember watching the movie.
Yeah, what's that guy's name? He was so famous for a long time. Anyway, so you find out that the main character, the guy, him and Brad Pitt are the same person, and the guy's like psychologically like schizophrenic or something, or multiple personality disorder or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when you rewatch the entire movie again after that, you watch it with that information that you learn at the end of the movie, and that reframes everything that you see. And so you're getting new information based off of seeing it. So something that has layers of depth is something like I read it, I get something out of it that has changed me, such that when I go back and read it, I get something out of it that changes me. And if it does that for forever, then that thing has infinite information. It has something like infinite surprise. Because like if you watch a movie and it's a kind of a flat basic narrative that's pretty, this happened, then that happened, then this happened, then that happened.
Yeah.
So when you watch it again, you know that this happened and that happened. So whenever an event occurs, you're not surprised by anything. You're not gaining any information. But if it's something that has depth and layers, then you watch it one time, you come back, you're surprised. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. And so so these structures that you get from these religious texts like
Yeah.
the Tao, Buddhism, Christianity, that what paradox provides is this openness for infinite revelation. Essentially, is that it's generative. It keeps generating new information, almost like a fractal that has infinite precision. You can never get all of the information out of it, because again, what is spoken of the Tao can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. So this paradoxical thing keeps its openness for like infinite information.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tao Te Ching is a perfect example of that. Shannon, I don't know if you've heard, Tao Te Ching is the second most translated book after Bible.
Yeah, about to say after the Bible, probably.
And the reason why it got translated so many times is because of the layers that we just talked about, and each translation carries the imprint of the person interpreting it, the stage of the spiritual journey that he's at, and the moment of whatever that brought him to that point where he wanted to translate. To be honest, I didn't rely heavily on one modern translation or the commentary while writing my book. I kind of distance that kind of helped me stay authentic to my own experience rather than just getting caught in all this scholarly interpretation, right? And that said, this is few things, right? While I noticed while exploring the modern landscape is when people translate from that layer that you mentioned, it could be like incredibly illuminating experience for them.
Yeah.
But others may not relate to that layer
Yeah.
because you may be in layer 1,000, someone may be in layer 10. How do you like relate? Because you would have to stay in that same layer, and there's infinite number of layers. Shannon.
Yeah,
So what
yeah.
layer do I pick? Right?
Yeah.
So you're right. Yeah, when we try to like over explain or domesticate the text, instead of honoring the mystery and allow the users to encounter the Tao in their own way, in their own wherever they are, and And I find like there are a lot of versions that you feel very inviting with those verses rather than instructions. And that's something I loved about Tao. It's not about instructions, it's about being poetic. And Lao Tzu wants us to make our own interpretation depending on the layer that we are at.
Mhm.
And that was the most beautiful and also problematic.
Yeah.
Right, because there are so many translations out there, but I couldn't relate to any of those, and so I made up
To make
my
your own.
own. So yeah, but every translation is just one person's attempt to express
To
the
express it.
inexpressible.
Yes, yes, yes,
You
yes.
can't. You just can't. Be it science, while you're writing a paper, you mentioned about the quantum mechanics. Like, how can you explain an atom or a photon? It's just hard. It's very similar to Tao.
But we end up with things like wave functions where a cat can be dead and alive at the same time. Like, oh, there's the
Yeah,
paradox once again. This is
there you
why
go.
quantum mechanics, like if you think about it, this quantum mechanics is so fascinating because it allows for paradox. And it's something like to me, the way I comprehend paradox, and I don't know, did you end up listening to my episode, The Ultimate Abstraction?
I did. I
Yeah.
did.
So within that episode, I'm trying to explain that within language structures, within conceptual structures, within the material, like this conceptual space, there are limits to resolution. So I treat this in terms of like the concept of resolution. And so within your language, you have to think of your language as having like a certain number of symbols. So, a language has 4 symbols, 4,000 symbols, 20,000 symbols, right? And for that language to have meaning, there must be some sort of consistent relationship with them. So, in other words, if I give you 5,000 symbols with no relationship between them and no syntax on how you put them together to construct new concepts, how do I put this together to point over here versus over there? Without that, then that's just random noise. There's no information there. And so, to have information, you need something like a set of symbols and then a consistent relationship between them, like a syntax, and just like what I would consider like an algebraic structure. And so the size of your language determines how well it can resolve a concept. So I'm looking at a concept, I'm trying to understand it. If I have a language that only has 10 symbols versus a language that has 1,000 symbols, and they both have coherent structure, so they don't have illogical, like they're both valid, logically sound structures, then the 10-dimensional one is going to only be able to resolve to a certain degree, and the 1,000-dimensional is going to be resolved to a higher degree. And so what I'm saying is that within any language structure, there's going to be a limit of resolution. And that limit of resolution is precisely where the paradox arises. So you have something like you're zooming in, and then you reach the resolution limit of your language, and then a paradox emerges. But that it doesn't emerge, or a contradiction emerges. But it doesn't emerge because there's something wrong with the language. It emerges because there's a hole, a literal hole there that cannot contain the deeper meaning. And so when you go to explore that contradiction, you have to kind of allow yourself to assume that there's something true there. So that's embracing paradox. Paradox is like a true contradiction. And so you see a contradiction, it makes you think that there's a falsehood, but you embrace that it's true, even though it's incoherent. And then this is where faith comes in, because now you're kind of putting something is giving you evidence that it's false, but you're embracing that it's true, despite the fact that it appears false. And so that requires faith. But once you embrace that faith, it allows you to keep that tension open long enough to traverse the whole. And what happens on the other end is something like a larger dimensional language. So you're traversing from a lower dimensional language to a larger dimensional language. And this is what my research is about. Like my actual literal quantum research is this relationship between lower dimensional spaces and higher dimensional spaces, and how you go from one to the other when there's a lack of information. And so to me, paradox arises from this idea of a lack of information, or a lack of ability to resolve. Yeah, I don't know why I mentioned that, but
No, that's beautiful. It's so powerful, Shannon.
oh,
I
because of
love
quantum, yeah,
listening to that.
because of quantum, because so quantum mechanics then is this idea of you get these states of up and down, dead and alive, and it's something like when you look at the nature of reality itself, the nature of reality itself is also like a language. It's a structure that has energy and matter, and it can be molded, and then it has a causal structure. When this, then that. I mean, that's how physics works. We predict the future based off the idea that from one state to the other, something is preserved. There's a symmetry there. So there's something like conservation of momentum, conservation of energy during a collision. You're saying that something is fixed from one state to the other, and because of that, I can predict the future. But the thing is that to be able to predict the future exactly, you need infinite information, infinite resolution. I know the momentum up to a million digits of precision. But the idea is that the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is telling you that there is actually a resolution limit of reality. The Planck length is telling you like the degree to which reality can be resolved. And on the other end of that is symmetry. It's the things that are consistent with the configuration of energy and matter. And so what I'm saying is that this arisal of contradictions in quantum mechanics is just another manifestation of the fundamental truth of reality. Part of the fundamental essence is paradox. Like I think that no matter what field you study in, whether it's philosophy, once you start breaking things down, you start trying to get to the what would be called the bottom turtle, like the truth from which all other things arise. Once you're trying to get there, you're going to arise at incoherent, contradictory, paradoxical nonsense, and it's everywhere. Paradox is everywhere. It's the foundation of reality.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think this is where we interweave this with the faith,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You kind of mix this with faith because there's only a certain amount of control that I can have. There's only a certain ability that I am meant to have in this life, and there's higher power, and that's where the faith and surrendering
Yes,
comes into play,
exactly.
and that's what we're very lucky to have discovered the faith in our own ways, Shannon, and
Yes.
I'm very grateful,
Yeah, we
very
should be
grateful
grateful.
for it,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of people that are still looking at the four Johnsons and asking, "Where's God?"
Yeah. Well,
It's
no, they've
crazy,
abandoned it completely. Like they think that the material is everything. Like this is why in that episode it's called Taoism, the failure of materialism. It's something like at this point I'm absolutely certain that there are resolution limits to reality. And like you said,
right?
control comes from being able to predict. And so if there's a resolution limit, there's something like I cannot predict what's going to happen anymore. And so in our reality, we're always faced to make decisions when there's not full information. If you say something like, I want to become a UFC champion or the boxing world champion, there's no logic that can convince you that that's going to work. You have to do something irrational. You have to irrationally embrace the fact that this is uncertain, is probably really unlikely, but the more you put all your energy into that which cannot be known and pursue it, that's when the universe speaks back to you. That's when you actually have this capacity to have a relationship with that which is beyond the material. And people who are trapped in the material, like I just don't think you can be like a fully completed person without some sort of faith component, unless you're just really lucky and you never had to encounter being in this like you were saying, you were working, as your life was in a state where you're working so much, you're exhausted. Like you needed something. You need to be broken down and humbled and face this before you're able to embrace it.
Exactly. And to get out of that, you need to have the faith, and we need to have that kind of a surrender to God and to that higher power, and let them, and you have the trust that they'll do the right thing because you're loved, and you felt that love once, and that's all that's needed. Your soul had felt that love for God at that 1 second, one moment somewhere in your millions and millions of lifetimes that we've been through, and that's the need, that's the longing that we have to know the God, to know the consciousness, to know the Christ, to know the universe. It's in us, in some of us, and it's not in some of us. And yesterday I was talking to someone, and they talked about the 3.5% rule. I don't know the exact nuances, but what it means, the essence is that it only takes 3.5% of this whole population to be awakened, to awaken the rest of the
Mm,
population.
mm,
So it's just 3.5% of the people that we need to know. We've been touched by faith, we've been touched by God, and we know this is not truth. And they've been going around in circles. Science has been going around in
yeah.
circles. Everyone's going around in circles, just
Yes.
trying to figure out what the truth is. But the truth is there's no truth. There's no one truth. It's both, and that's unfortunately the paradox that we live in, is to embrace it and just be as authentic as you could at any given moment. And that's
Yes, to be
all. That's all
authentic.
that's
Yes,
needed.
yes, sincerity. Actually, yeah, I and this is actually really important. It's because so within my poem, The Ultimate Abstraction, I make a distinction between type 1 contradictions and type 2 contradictions. Type 1 contradictions are those that actually do arise from subjective, like some sort of subjective failure. Like in other words, delusion, some sort of logical inconsistency. And this is the nature of sin. Like there is something that we have to contend with, which is when you don't act out of a space of sincerity. For whatever reason, you've placed yourself in a mode when you're too attached to an identity. For example, this is one of the reasons you're too attached to thinking of yourself in a certain way. And whenever you're living through your life and you encounter an event that challenges your perception of yourself, you then have an option. Do I reject this data? Do I reject God? Do I reject reality? Do I reject the essence of the Tao, the essence of God? Do I reject that so that I can maintain a perception? Or do I reject this perception so that I can go toward God? This is the thing that we're challenged with all the time. Only if you're in, so the sincere thing to do is to let go of any attachment to a perception and align yourself with God, and to always want to do that. That's why in the Christian tradition, there's this idea of humbling yourself to God. I mean, especially in Islam too. I mean, that's all about it's all about
Yeah.
submitting.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is that you're trying to humble yourself to God so that you're more aligned with God. And this is why, and this is associated with the idea of the fall in the story of Adam and Eve. Like to me, the story of the fall is the birth of consciousness, essentially. And it's the moment in which you have a separation between you and God because you did things your way and not God's way. And so to me, this is also consistent with entering samsara, because samsara comes from a sense of self. Like a sense of self requires a self and an other, an in and an out. And so that requires separation. This is the breaking of the binary. So prior to entering samsara, prior to the fall, you have something like a union with God, a union with God, a sincere relationship with God, the whole. Then you have this sense of self, which creates a self and an other, which is to how you create perceptions and characteristics. This is how information works. You need this, like a breaking of symmetry. So now you have a binary, but that binary is a broken symmetry that you feel this emptiness inside of you, like this separation. Like the separation is
Mhm.
always there. And so within the Kantian psychoanalysis, this is called the lack. So within yourself as a subject, you are what's called a I think it's split subject. That's not the right word. um, yeah, I think it's split subject, but you're split between the structure, the space of order, and the space of the real. And so at your center, there's a hole or a lack, and it's something. And this is associated with drive and desire, because as you said, you're aware of this lack, and you start doing things in the world to try to fill it. It's like someone say, like a God hole, for example. But if you're someone who is unwilling to do it sincerely and to embrace whatever reality gives you, then you can create sin, which creates distortion. So you're no longer reflecting the nature of God. I mean, you're still reflecting the nature of reality in the sense that you are in a state of delusion or sin, but you're not like reflecting it in a way with fidelity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. That was so deep. You took me into another layer of, I think you just peeled another layer.
Awesome. Love it. I appreciate that so much. This is what I was hoping. See, this is why when I sent you the email about how the conversations work here, we try to open them up,
Yep.
ease into it, and let whatever happens
Love
happen. And
it.
then once the gems start arriving, we just kind of like harvest them. So we're in a
Yeah,
harvesting
and
state right now.
we are, and you're doing it so gracefully. Thank you.
Appreciate that. I appreciate you for coming on too. It's amazing.
Course, thank you, thank you. And just one I've been always living with this contradiction when when you talked about making those small corrections, making those small improvements. And where does affirmations fit in this ground, Shannon? What do you think about them? Because I've always wondered about affirmations. Do they work? Of course they work to an extent, but then what this world has made out of affirmation is crazy. They've just taken it to another level where they're not embodying what they want to affirm. It's just words. It's just words.
Yeah.
Of course words have weightage. You could talk to me through the quantum, and how all of this works as well, because I'm more curious to learn. Does affirmations really work? And I do have affirmations on the book, and that's the paradox that I had to live with, because I I want to provide something for the readers, but also at the same time, I just don't like where the world's heading
Yeah.
towards affirmations and how they glorify an affirmation and not and focus less on embodying it. To me, like affirmations aren't kind of like declarations; they're invitations. Like I don't try to tell myself something I don't actually feel yet,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Because my
yes, yes.
body knows
Yeah.
when words aren't true. So instead of like forcing a statement like I am confident
Yes,
when I'm
yes,
actually
yes.
not feeling confident at
Yeah,
all,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. They become platitudes.
truths are from right,
Yeah.
exactly. And you gotta like open the door rather than push a belief, right? Things like I'm learning to trust myself.
Yeah.
I'm willing to soften and I'm open to clarity. And these kind of affirmations kind of feel gentle and they kind of feel spacious and more important, they're believable, right?
Yeah, unbelievable.
They don't demand a brand new identity. We're just, we just invite a new possibility. And I think that's where your quantum theory or quantum mechanics comes into play, because it's not about yes or no, true or false. It's about the possibility of having the cat dead and having the cat alive. So it's just having that, like you beautifully said, it's about the paradox. It's about embracing the paradox that both could be true at the same time. You could live with both the truths, and it's okay. It's okay to have the scholarly translations. It's okay to have the regular ones. It's okay to be the top and to be that person who strives. And it's also okay to just let it go and sit with it and let the intuition guide you in whatever ways that it wants to guide you. So both are true. There's time for this, there's time for that.
Yeah.
So it's really about not forcing a timeline or not forcing a peel or in your words,
Yeah.
and just going.
It's about potential. And this is what I
Yes.
my understanding of reality is
Mhm.
so within physics, when we define the state of a system, so the way we do physics is that we
Mhm.
have a state of a system, and we have equations of motion. We insert the initial conditions, the initial state into the equations of motions, then we do calculations to predict the future. That's basically like in a nutshell. But the thing is that to define a state of a system, you need two things. You need degrees of freedom, which are properties or concepts or characteristics of the system, and then setting of the degrees of freedom. Like you have the degree of freedom of position, the degree of freedom of momentum, and then you give a value of those things. And so the idea is that if I want to predict the future with infinite precision to know exactly what's going to happen, I have to feed infinite precision input. But the problem with this is that to have infinite precision requires infinite information because we define these things in a continuum. So in a continuum, you have infinite digits of precision, but that information needs to be stored in physical energy and matter because I can make a measurement and extract that
Mhm.
information. So
Mhm.
it's written, like think of the matter as a piece of paper, and then and then like the settings of it, like its momentum is like writing it down on the piece of paper. But to have infinite precision, you need infinite paper, which is to say you need infinite energy and matter. And so instead, it makes more sense that there's something like an information limit. And this is what you get when you see again the Heisenberg uncertainty principle or the Planck length, where the Planck length is telling you like
Mhm.
the size of the pixel, like how big of the smallest pixel there is, or something like that.
Yep. Yep.
And so for me, what reality is that there is no exactness. There is no exactness. And so the physical configuration of energy and matter of any system at any state has something like a machine precision. It has so many digits of precision, and then beyond that, there is only symmetry. There is only that which is consistent, and it's the idea of trying to define a point in a continuum. If I'm trying to define a point 4.36, if I give you point 436, if I give you those digits, then I've given you what 0.436 436. I've given you three digits of precision. But if I were to change the numbers after those three, these are fixed. So all of these are symmetric with respect to this constraint data. But if I give you four digits of precision, now you have less freedom. And so you're constricting. The more precision I give, the more I'm constricting. But there's always a hole there. And that hole are all the digits that have not been defined yet. These are all the things that are symmetric with the constraint data. And for me, reality has an incompleteness. At every point in reality, there's an incompleteness, a space of symmetry, the gauge of the universe, and that's what quantum states are. And so it's not the case that it's like the system is really in some state and you just don't know what it is. It's not in a state. The information is created once you have an interaction. And so to me, this idea of the foundation of paradox, as it emerges in things like Lacan, as it emerges in philosophy or whatever, it's actually as an ontological basis in physics itself. Like this is the nature of reality.
Wow. That was very deep. No, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just it's sitting in that in between. It's just sitting in between not knowing and sitting in between the possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it's like yeah, I have another way of formulating the so to me, contradiction or paradox is a logical singularity. Um and what I mean by that is we can go back to calculus 1. And so in calculus, when we define a derivative, you have something like an xy axis and you have a curve, right? And so you wanted the derivative itself is essentially if I take this curve and I select a point on the curve, then there is a line that's tangent to that curve. And so the slope is telling, I mean, the derivative is telling you the slope of that line, of that tangent line. And so this would be like a slope of 0, then it has some value. And so that's how you compute the derivative. But to do that, to compute the derivative, you need to take 2 points on this curve, and you take the limit as they come together. And so to compute the slope, you take the rise versus the run. If I'm taking this curve, then I go up some and I go this way some, and then that's the slope.
Right.
And so I take how much it rises and divide it by how much it runs in this direction. Because you take it divide by how much it runs, as I take these 2 points and bring them closer and closer together, the denominator goes to 0. So you take the limit at the denominator goes to 0. But what that means is that the idea of taking the limit as the denominator gets to 0 is I want these things to be as close as possible while still being separate. Because if they're the same, then I'm dividing by 0. I reach the singularity, which is an infinity. And so I reach this infinity. And so the ideal is to get them as close as possible. This is the logic of the limit. And so with that being said, then the most ideal state you could possibly have in the limit of the logic is A and not A, for them to be the same and not the same simultaneously. But the problem is that state, as I get closer and closer and closer, this is the idea of more precision. The closer they get, the more digits of precision I'm providing. And so the point of A and not A actually exists at the point of infinite precision, which that infinite precision, so within the symbolic order, within our structure of language, that infinite precision is always outside of the language because there's a resolution limit to the language. And so the paradox is a manifestation of the ideal. It's like the Platonic ideal is always outside. You can never get a perfect equilateral triangle manifested in reality, but we can conceptualize it. And so it's something like, as beings, we exist in both the space of the ideal and in this temporal space. Like we have a connection to the eternal. So this is a separation of heaven and earth. This space of structure is earth. Then the heaven is just like this ideal that's always outside, but we're also like connected to it. And so this is our whole. This is our lack that we're always trying to reunite with. And so to me, the paradox itself arises from an information limit in this way I've just described. And infinite precision, or the singularity in this sense, coincides with paradox.
Oh, wow. And now I understand, Shannon, how difficult to come from a science background and to actually when you talk to me about your when you were young, how you were into, your family followed Christianity and then you became an atheist and then back to Christianity. It talks to me, what you just called out, it just talks millions of words about the experience that you just went through.
It's a crazy. That's why I have the podcast.
It's
Like,
crazy.
I'm trying to dump it all out of my head. I need to get it out of me.
You need to, and you're doing great.
I need to get it out of me.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's why when you sent it, like when you got the email that you are not only a person with a background in information technology, and that you're at the foundation of breaking paradox. I mean, I think your book is needed because people do not comprehend paradox. They don't like. I listen to people debate. Like I listen to religious debates, like where you have a Muslim debating a Christian, or you have someone debating philosophy, and they always bring up this idea of the law of the excluded middle. Like you can't have, it has to be this or that. It can't be both of them at the same time. Like no, 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 no. That is the foundation of reality. That is the foundation of reality. Unless you have paradox somewhere in your perception or your conceptualization of reality, you're disconnected from the divine and you're disconnected from something fundamental.
Absolutely. And when you talked about the day in the world, yeah, I think when I think about the future of Taoism in the next decade, especially like with all the digital media and the global connectivity and now AI, like just shaping much of our experience, like really what strikes me now is how naturally the Taoist tradition adapts.
Hmm.
you know, now when Tao Te Ching was written 2,500 years ago, and now we can still use its essence. Like Taoism has always been about the flow, about meeting the moment as it is, and as we're entering the time where that skill is becoming super essential. And I actually think Taoism will grow in three very interesting ways. First, accessibility, right? For most of the history, the Tao Te Ching had lived in scrolls, monasteries, and lineages, and now anyone with a phone can access
Yes,
translation,
yes.
teachings,
That's the biggest
and
thing about.
discussions instantly,
Yep.
right? And the global connectivity means the Tao is no longer tied to a culture.
Yeah.
It's becoming a universal language. People seeking just that little bit of softness in this super hard world. And the second is like the blending of wisdom and technology and science. And I think that's where Shannon, you would play a big role in blending all of them together. Of course, AI and science, they can't replace your spiritual experience, but it can amplify it,
I
right?
think they fuse. Like I actually do not treat science like an object. It's not a structure. It's not an object. It is embodied. It is lived. It's a spirit that I'm in relationship with. It speaks to me. I speak with it. I'm in communion with it. I'm in a sincere, loving relationship with it. And and it speaks through me. Like it literally is speaking to you through me. And this is again, this is what I this is the thing that a lot of people struggle with is that they want to compartmentalize everything. This goes in this box, this goes in this box, and they should never touch each other.
Yeah, like
And if you start
labeling.
mixing things together at all, you're a crackpot kook, and you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, the universe, like the eternal, the universe, is not separated. You can't compartmentalize. And this is something my friend, who's also a physicist, who is very spiritually oriented. I think he's actually just become a Greek Orthodox, or a Orthodox Christian, but he emphasizes this all the time is that what we have is this problem of people trying to compartmentalize, but the true essence is you can't do that. And so once you start reaching truth, once you start reaching like the bottom turtle, like the foundational truth that the Tao is surrounding, like once you start
Yeah.
reaching those, then that's when separation starts to go away. And this is precisely what the paradox does, because again, binaries up and down is a separation so that we can perceive. Paradox is up is down. You're resolving the binary, and you're collapsing them into a singular thing. So that is the act of removing the separation. And so yeah, and this is why what you were saying about the Tao being persistent for all these years, the way I understand it, especially from interacting with so many people like yourself and other people that I've interacted with who get to a certain level, I think it's a natural maturity. I think if you literally are sincere, you start off living your life in a sincere way, and you also do new things. So you don't just put yourself in a box and do the same thing every single day. You have to expand your experience or languages through like study or like going out and living the world and be sincere. And I think that what that does is that if you're doing that, eventually your language or your perception of reality is going to grow in size. And if you're doing it sincerely, then you can't start off one experience and then do a new experience and not have them have a symmetric connection between them. When you learn something new, it's attached to what you knew before. It's like learning a new language. You expand from what you know to what's new. And so when you go from what you know to what's new, there's going to be a symmetry between them. And so if you do enough of that expanding outwards, your language is going to get larger. You're going to create that coherent structure. And then I think what ends up happening is that it all like gets large and then it collapses into something that compresses all of that knowledge and data. And the Tao is one of those compressions. The truths of Christianity, even though I think like a lot of Christians might be upset with me for putting it in this way, but for the purpose of conversation, I'll put it in this way. Like when you meet enough people and they're sincere in this way, they're all reflecting God. They're all reflecting truth from their own reference frame. But if it's true truth, then it will persist in time. And when I come and interact with someone else from my local neighborhood and their local neighborhood, there will be a symmetry and you can unite them, and then you can see yourself in them, they see yourself, and you come to know yourself. And this is the blending that happens that I think has to happen, but it cannot happen if you're not sincere.
Beautiful. And that's Tao revealing itself to us. That's the Christ revealing
Yes.
themselves to us. It's beautiful.
And that's the reason
beautiful.
why I started this podcast. Like I'm trying to communicate, I'm
Yeah.
trying to communicate this, but because I'm a scientist, I try to do it from, like, my entire podcast is a thesis. It's all arguments, and I give arguments that can be verified through observation. So, like, I'm changing words slightly, so that I'm taking my language structure and I'm creating a coherent relationship between all the words. That's consistent at scale. So so you go from lower resolution to higher resolution is consistent at scale, which is again part of my research that I worked on. And so the idea is that to create metaphor, like, what does it mean for something to be literal? It means that you take two things that have similar characteristics and you stitch them together at where they're the same. So, like, in mathematics and in physics, the way we create our mathematical models is that we take a physical system, like a pendulum, like we have a pendulum going back and forth. We take this physical system, and then we take a conceptual system, like a circle. And then we say something like, all right, this is 0 degrees, this is 90 degrees, this is 180 degrees, this is 270 degrees, and then this is 360 degrees, which is to go around a circle. This is why pies show up everywhere. And so what we've done is we've taken this physical characteristic, we've taken the nature of the circle, which is this cyclical nature, and then we say these are the same. So I'm going to use this to model that. And that's literal. And so this is how we create the symmetry across language, is stitching things together in this way. And so when I'm trying to communicate to people, what I'm saying is something like, here's an example: minds and computer algorithms. Okay, what are the symmetries between them? As a mind, you have a physical body. A computer has a physical system. They're both physical systems of the universe that can be placed in many different configurations based off of what information they're given and how they process data. This is the symmetry between minds and computer algorithms. I'm stitching these things together. I'm saying that here's a symmetry between them. And then I can give you an observation to verify it. If I tell you a secret, you can get up, walk into another room, and tell someone that secret, which means that I had to change your configuration, which means that as I'm speaking to you, I am programming you, literally, not as a metaphor, not like literally, I am programming you. If you're listening to my words, you're going from a configuration prior to hearing my words to a configuration after hearing my words, and that's stored in your physical body as literal, as a configuration of memory, because you can walk in and tell someone, which is the same thing if I read it on a piece of paper. So what I've said is objectively true. There's no break in symmetry. And so you can see how, and so now that I've stitched these things together, you can use the information between them to understand computers and minds using these metaphors, which is precisely what's happening when I meet someone like you or the other people I've discussed who start from their own local neighborhood, of like the Dow, for example, and I'm starting from my local neighborhood. They're going to stitch together. And this is what the podcast is. Like, I'm trying to, like, create a language that, like, allows us all to see the commonalities that we can stitch ourselves together in this way.
Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful, Shannon. And the ambiguity, right, that we find in all of this is actually not a flaw, right? It's a source of its usefulness. It's life itself isn't clear cut. Emotions aren't linear. Like, leadership's unpredictable. Like, nothing straightforward anymore, and the mind is rarely satisfied with simple answers.
Yes.
So then this is where Lao Tzu says, don't give us clarity in the form of rigid definitions. He just gave us clarity in the form of spaciousness. The ambiguity of science, Tao, religion just creates room for your own wisdom to raise, and it doesn't tell you what to think. It helps you see it. And honestly, and that's what science does too. It doesn't tell you this. It just helps you see it, helps you discover and figure herself or itself out. And honestly, that's what makes all of this timeless, and that's why we still have science, and it will be there forever and ever and ever, no matter how many philosophies and books and religions come and say the truth. They're not gonna believe it. They're gonna go, figure it out themselves, because that's what Tao makes you do. It helps you see that picture for yourself, and in a clear way, and in however way that human mind want to perceive. So, yeah, a little prescriptive book on science would have become outdated long ago. But they continue to speak to people in eras that just reflects something back to themselves. And really, to me, like, the people who find that these are too ambiguous are often approaching it like like it's an instructions. It's like a textbook,
Hmm.
expecting it to be like super
Yes.
straightforward.
Yes.
But really, the Tao, and they're not offering information. They're just
Yes.
offering us transformation,
Yes.
which is the most important. I don't need information. Just transform me. God
Yeah.
already made me that person. I don't want to go through all this, and that's what Tao offers you. Like, it's just that, can you hold that, both the truths at once? Can you find clarity through softness? Can you like trust the timing?
Yes.
Just trust the timing. And why do you want to force outcomes? And can you see beyond language
Yes.
and,
Can you see
into
beyond language? That's
experience?
really
And
important. Yeah.
that's these are they were not like intellectual questions, but they're more experiential for
Yes.
us to live through all of this. So yeah, now really becomes a practical solution for the moment, when we just stop to decode, and just start allowing it to just happen.
That's
So
that's the foundation. Is something like you're allowing your subjective experience to establish like objective reality. You're saying something like there's a separation between objective and subjective, and people usually don't like if that's just your subjective opinion. That's just your opinion. But there is a nature of the objective and the subjective, and when you're trying to go beyond language to understand yourself and God and reality, um, you have to you have to be willing to look foolish because you have to say something
yeah.
like I have connect like whatever was spoken to me that you can't verify is the truth. It's like the word. That's like the nature of it. Like it's the word of God. And this is something as a Christian, whenever you speak as saying like God told me this, or I was talking to God, people are like who do you think you are? You're talking to the creator of the universe. You're talking to God. Like what type of narcissistic crazy? And that's part of the foolishness of it. It's part of the foolishness to say something like, from my perspective, I have some sort of access to the foundation to the nature of God. And yeah, and like you said, it's the ambiguity, the openness is why we have the capacity for subjectivity. It's the capacity for uh it's freedom. Yeah, I mean, we can go like right now. I mean, if we only like we're at toward the end of the 2 hours, and my wife's about to come home, I got to go out with her.
See.
But it's the openness. It's the feminine aspect of reality. That I associate the subjective with the feminine and the objective with the masculine. Rules, structures, constraint, information, language, like that stuff. That's like it's mechanistic. This then that, then this then that. That's mechanistic. That's the masculine. And then the openness, the freedom, the uncertainty, the space for creation. That's where the subjective, the feminine is. Because if everything is deterministic and everything is all structural, then it's death by freezing. There's no freedom. There's no capacity for subjectivity. But if everything is,
Yep.
if it's all subjective and openness and there's no structure, then that's death by fire. It's pure randomness, pure entropy. And so you have this relationship between fire and ice, subjective and objective, feminine and masculine. That's being played here. And what we're actually saying is that the openness is the feminine nature of reality that we need to embrace.
But that's beautiful. And I think I was listening to one of your older podcasts, and that's where you said it's not tied to a gender, but as a universal moment of consciousness. And I just love the way you described it, Shannon, and that deeply, deeply resonated with me. I do want to talk about it, but I think we may be running out of
Oh yeah, we're
time,
running out of
right?
time. I
Yeah.
always figured we can always talk again. It's just one
Yay.
click away. We can always have another conversation if you enjoyed this
Of course.
experience.
Absolutely did. This was amazing experience for me, Shannon. Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving people like me an opportunity to
I
do
appreciate you
this.
for reaching out. Right now, I'm a small nobody, so I'm still trying to build myself. So like, I was actually really, really surprised and happy to hear that you
Mhm.
that you wanted to come on the show. Well, with that being said, do you want to say something about your book before we sign off? Where can you get it? What you expect to get from it? Like, you want to say something about that? Oh yeah, and if you have any social media, like any social media that you want to promote.
Yeah, of course. I can talk a little bit about where you can find the book. Embracing Paradoxes is a simple. It's a very accessible doorway into the wisdom of Tao Te Ching, which is one of the most ancient scriptures that we ever know of. And the book is made of 81 short reflections, each inspired by a verse of the Tao. And every chapter is designed to be something you can read in just few moments, but carry it with you throughout the day. Right now, the book is available in Amazon in paperback and hardcover. I don't feel called to release a digital version yet. There's something about holding the physical book, flipping to a random page, and just letting the words meet you where you are kind of feels very important to this little project that I'm on.
I
So,
like how you said
so
I don't feel called to. I like your phrasing.
thank you. So for now, it's available only in print, and readers can find it directly on Amazon. And I'm working on creating a website.
Yeah.
So I'm working with them. I tried creating it. I'm like, I don't have time for that. So I'm just gonna like get someone to build it. It's in the process. It's in works.
Mhm.
So it'll soon be out there. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I am on social media, so under my name.
Want to upload it. And yeah,
Awesome.
so everyone support Prashanthi and her new journey as an author. If you're looking for a different look into the Tao Te Ching that is not scholarly but is more practical and based off of lived experience, please check out her book. Perhaps consider getting a gift for someone who you think it might be helpful for. And I would like to thank my guest Prashanthi for coming and joining us today. And with that, stay turtling, my friends. Peace.